Hi, and welcome to Federal Appraisal LLC's video series. In this video, we will discuss the identification of clients and intended users in appraisal. An appraiser writes an appraisal for two sets of people, the client and the intended users. According to the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, USPAP, the client is the person who engages the appraiser in a specific assignment. This can be an individual, a group, an entity, or entities. The client may engage and communicate with the appraiser directly or through an agent, such as an attorney, accountant, or appraisal management company. The intended users of an appraisal are the client and any other party identified by the client as someone who will use the appraisal. The intended users also can be an individual, group, or an entity or entities. The client's name and the intended users must be reported in the appraisal and will be included in a written appraisal report, at least on the title page, and then again in the appraisal context section. USPAP permits restricted appraisal reports to be addressed only to clients with no additional intended users. Non-restricted appraisal reports may be addressed to one or both. These are the only parties that the appraiser has an appraiser-client relationship with. Therefore, these are the only parties that the appraiser has professional obligations to. These obligations include ethics, professionalism, competency, and confidentiality. Others, those who have possession of the appraisal, even those who may read and use an appraisal, have no rights or claims against the appraiser. Therefore, the identification of the clients and intended users is of significant professional importance. For example, suppose you are the owner of an apartment building and need an appraisal for estate tax planning. You contact an appraiser and order an appraisal. You have engaged the appraiser, and so, according to USPAP, you are the client. As you and the appraiser discuss the assignment, you make it clear to the appraiser that the appraisal will be given to your accountant and your lawyer for their use in setting up your estate. As the client, you designate these two people or entities as intended users. The appraiser can discuss the assignment results with these intended users, and the report must be written in a manner that allows these intended users to use the report for the intended use, which is in this case, the estate tax planning. Thus, in this example, the appraiser has professional obligations to you, your accountant, and your lawyer for the agreed upon appraisal purpose, use, and scope of work. We cover appraisal purpose, use, and scope of work in other videos. Now, let's say a week goes by and you decide to sell the property to your brother. You give your brother a copy of the appraisal as part of all the records and documents you have on the property. With the report hand in, has your brother now become the client or an intended user? According to USPAP, the answer is no. While you, as the client, can authorize, after the fact, the appraiser to discuss the appraisal with your brother, the report was not written for your brother as the client or as an intended user. Having access to a copy of an appraisal does not grant the holder of the appraisal any rights or expectations of an appraiser-client or appraiser-intended user relationship. As another example, before making a loan on a property, the bank hires an appraiser who completes the appraisal with the bank as the client, which lists no additional intended users. Let's say the prospective buyer of the property that was appraised, the borrower, asks the appraiser for a copy of the appraisal and wants to discuss the value conclusions. Unfortunately, without permission in advance from the client, in this case the bank, the appraiser cannot oblige the prospective buyer, even though the appraisal was on the property they will be buying and was written to support the bank loan they had applied for. In some states, lending laws require disclosure of appraisals by banks to borrowers, but these laws do not create a professional relationship between the appraiser and the borrower. The borrower is not an intended user, as per USPAP, just because the borrower is permitted to receive a copy of the appraisal from the bank. Again, merely having a copy and reading or even using an appraisal does not create an appraiser-client intended user relationship. Consider a continuation of our first example. You, as the apartment building owner, file your estate tax documents with the IRS, including the appraisal. This use of the appraisal was identified as being part of the appraisal's intended purpose and use. While it is true that the appraiser intended to allow the IRS to hold, read, and even use the appraisal, the IRS is not an intended user in this case, as per USPAP, because 1. The IRS was not listed as an intended user in the appraisal. 2. The IRS's uses for the appraisal were not part of the appraisal's stated purpose and uses, which are different from you and your attorney and your accountant's uses. The appraisal's purpose and use was for your work before the IRS. It was not for the IRS's work before you. And 3. The term use by the IRS is essentially a different sense of the word, as it is broader than in USPAP, where it is related to appraisal users, namely clients and intended users. Essentially, naming clients and intended users controls professional liability for the appraiser while controlling costs for the client. As the number of intended users increases, so does the liability for the appraiser and the cost of the client. For this reason, fairness opinions and appraisals for syndications and public offerings often cost 10 to 50 times as much as appraisals written for one client and no intended users. Clarifying in advance the rights of clients and intended users, and of holders and readers of appraisals, and even of potential users without a professional relationship to the appraiser, will allow you to plan and order your appraisals from the start in a manner that will be most effective for your needs. We encourage you to discuss this topic with us as part of determining your appraisal needs and scope of service so that you can maximize savings, meaning, and value from your appraisals. If you enjoyed this video, please give us a thumbs up and click below to subscribe.